Hello everyone, welcome back to another portal mapping and modding tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be going over some entities that will allow you to have finer control over the player's movement and their inventory through the entity's player speed mod, trigger weapon strip, and logic player proxy. We'll start by looking at player speed mod. Player speed mod is a simple entity that allows you to modify the player's speed, as the name suggests. Within the flags of this entity, there's also a number of other things you can suppress. You can turn off the crosshair, you can make it so the player can't jump or crouch. All these flags are applicable. Some of them are less applicable in Portal 2 than others. Other than those flags though, this entity has no key values. The way you use it, we're just going to use this button. You want to select your speed mod with an output. I've just named mine speed mod. And you will want to run the modify speed input. Now by default, this is set to 1, and when it's set to 1, that's your default speed, and that means that the speed mod is disabled. So that also means that any flags you have set in this speed mod, like if you have it set to suppress jump or duck, those won't work while this is set to 1. So if you want the player to be at relatively the same speed, but you only want to prevent them from jumping or crouching, you can set it to 0.99 or something like that, where there's no perceptible difference in the player's speed, but it still activates the speed mod. Of course, for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to set this to 2, so when we press this button, our player will be twice as fast. Now the thing about how player speed mod applies speed is it's not actually modifying the player's movement speed. What it's doing is changing the time scale of the player. So it's more like you're going in slow versus fast motion. For example, setting modify speed to 2 will make me run twice as fast, but it'll also make me fall twice as fast, and vice versa when it's set to lower than 1. So that's something to consider. If you're disabling jumping for whatever reason, you won't really run into that, but it's something to keep in mind. The next entity I will talk about is trigger weapon strip. This is a trigger entity, of course, and well, it's pretty self-explanatory. When the player walks into it, it will strip them of their weapons. You can set in the key values whether that means they're dropped on the ground in front of them or they are deleted. I'm going to keep it on drop on the ground for now. And you want to make sure that the flags are set to clients only. Portal 2 doesn't have any NPCs with weapons that can be stripped. However, clients is the default. You likely won't have it set to anything else unless you're transforming this trigger from a different trigger that had settings. So just make sure if you're doing that it's set to clients, but if you're making a new entity, it should just be set to this by default. This last entity, logic player proxy, is a bit more of a catch-all. It's used generally to control player state, more specifically in Portal 2. It allows you to do things like add and remove potatoes from your gun. It allows you to make outputs when the player crouches or jumps or fires a portal. Generally, it's quite a powerful entity as long as you know that it exists, which is why I'm talking about it. The player proxy itself does not have any flags or class info. Everything it does is through inputs and outputs. So, you can see if I create an output from here, there's a number of outputs you can do. On duck, on jump, on primary portal placed, on secondary portal placed, on unduck. Maps will often use, if they need an extra button, they will often use on duck and on unduck as an extra input. You might think throw gun, or maps. I believe there are some maps that switch between the gravity gun and the portal gun, and they will use this on duck output to switch between those. It can be handy if you need an extra input, especially since you really shouldn't be binding buttons to the player's keyboard in a map. So this is a great alternative if you only need one button. It's not the most intuitive binding, but it is certainly better than the alternative of replacing the player's existing binds. Now with this button, I'm going to just take a look at the logic player proxy's inputs. So here, add potatoes and remove potatoes are both inputs. There's also an input here, set drop enabled. In some parts of the Portal 2 campaign, there are areas where you cannot drop what you're holding. These are mostly areas where you're escorting a Wheatley through some sort of cutscene, or through some sort of section in general. Where you're not allowed to drop him, that's done through a logic player proxy. You set this to 1 or 0. For demonstration purposes, I'm just going to make it so that when I press this button, it adds potatoes to my portal gun. So here, we're in our map. Now this button is connected to our player speed mod. Right now, this is my regular speed. I press this, I'm now twice as fast. And you will be able to notice that when I jump, I fall a lot faster. Because, like I said, it just changes the time scale of the player and not the movement speed. This other button should add potatoes to our gun through the logic player proxy. And there she is. And then on this block should be our trigger weapon strip that removes our gun. There we go. You toss it on the ground, but of course you can turn on the key value that just deletes it entirely. So those are some ways that you can have finer control over your player's movement and their inventory in Portal. Hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.